This paper today I am presenting is about trade unions and whistleblowers. So this is a fruitful conversation that I had with Kate Kenny when she was out visiting in Grenoble, where she had a subset of interviews that she had in a larger project, which talked about the role of unions and how they represented or supported workers disclosing or blowing the whistle, if you like. And so we decided to explore or dig a little deeper about the role of unions in this case. So in our article, which we have a draft of, if anybody would like to take a look at it, we approach the question of unions and whistleblowing from a unique perspective, so the perspective of the whistleblowers. So we draw on empirical research with a subset of whistleblowing workers who were in particular need of solidarity and support, as they were workers who had left their roles due to whistleblowing reprisal. So just to give an idea of what I want to cover in the session. So just a bit of a background to the research, the method, so who we interviewed, and then splitting the empirical research, that's always the interesting bit, into the views from experts, so those observing what was going on in terms of unions and whistleblowing, unions and supporting whistleblowers, then some stories from or experiences of the whistleblowers themselves, which we have for the time being framed in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then I just want to make a few final comments on whistleblowing and union renewal, which is something that these two areas have not necessarily been put together. And union renewal is my thing and whistleblowing is Kate's thing. So it was, is this something interesting that we need to look into a bit further? Is there a role for unions, for regulators, in terms of the limits of the law and how unions can be involved in protecting whistleblowing workers, but also from the point of view of unions and how they can, this area, which is a growing area of importance because of new forms of regulation and legislation coming in around whistleblowing protection. So the opportunities and challenges. So the background to the research, as I just mentioned, whistleblowing has become increasingly significant. Obviously, high-profile cases like right from, where do you start from? So the Space Shuttle Challenger to Volkswagen emissions to Cambridge Analytica. So we've had these high-profile cases where it's found out that workers were aware of what was going on, but were too scared. So these cultures of silence due to the lack of protection or the culture of fear and culture of silence of not feeling like they can speak out against wrongdoing. So we have emerging legislation. So this is also, as I said, very significant because the law is catching up with in this area, and so therefore regulators, legislators, different actors are negotiating their roles within it and can potentially expand or develop their roles in this area. Then there's a lack of research on unions' role in whistleblowing. And I think the key here is that, so whistleblowers are often failed by the law. So this session is the limits of the law. So they're often failed by the law and need support. So here the unions come in potentially, and also in emergent legislation, particular parties and prescribed persons could involve unions in terms of developing these types of policies, but unions tend to be left out of this category when emerging legislation is being developed. So there's only one, as I've got here, what we already know, there's only the one, as far as we know, standard setting organization that recommends union consultation in standard setting. So the idea of having unions involved in building legislation, framing legislation, transposing different forms of legislation, and being prescribed persons who can offer protection is not necessarily the case, but also potentially a lack of research in the area. So maybe a sort of a gap. I'm making assumptions here. There might be a lot more out there than we realise. So a lot of the research has been done by Lewis and Vandekachova. So the research that they've done is that unions generally ignored as potential advisors to organisations implementing policies. And as I said, only one standard setting agency, as far as we're aware, the British Standards Agency, that recommends union consultation. Unions' role in campaigning for legal changes to whistleblower protection has been variable. I mean, this is Lewis and Vandekachova's research that I'm drawing on here, because if you do a search of different unions, obviously they have policies and they always have a section on their website around whistleblowing, but how that transposes into action is unclear. And unions have not traditionally been vocal in this area, but from the legislation, is there a gap here to look at how unions are reacting or responding to the new legislation? So the EU Whistleblowing Directive in 2016, we're talking about the European context, had to be transposed into national legislation by 2019. So we are in the early days still of, depending on how you look at it, but so 5 years on, what has been going on with unions. So researching whistleblowers. So as I said, this is a subset of interviews from a wider project on the lived experience of whistleblowers. I've got the references at the end of the slide for the research that's already been published on this project. There's a range of different countries and sectors, but the main countries are UK, North America, and America and Canada. And the sectors are public sector, health, and education. It was based on convenient sampling because of the difficulties of getting access to whistleblowers. So this reflects a limitation of the research, obviously, because if you've got people who are ready to be interviewed and be involved in research on whistleblowing, they might actually be better protected than those who are not. So there might be there will inevitably be some underreporting of the qualitative and quantitative costs of disclosing. So out of 58 whistleblowers, 10 mentioned trade unions. Out of 17 experts, 3 mentioned unions. So we're focusing on this subset of 13 people. So in terms of what the experts were saying about the role of unions in whistleblowing, here you can see that one of the union's key roles in protecting workers was their access to the legal provision that the union offers. And I know from other research that I've done in other areas in France and in the UK, that this is a key area of support or insurance that the unions can offer, is the legal support to take cases to tribunal or to provide a lawyer if the worker needs it to be protected in a particular case. So in this first one, we've got Cullen, which is a UK whistleblowing charity. This is what the expert is saying in terms of how key unions can be to support people in terms of legal representation. And then again, this second expert, so Amanda, from a US Labour Centre, is talking about this notion of having collective support. So if you've got a union behind you, then you've got collective support in your whistleblowing claims or in the process that you're going through. So having an organisation behind you as an individual, you have this collective support that you can rely on or use to support you if you're going through a whistleblowing claim. So in terms of whistleblower stories, if we look at the good to start with, here we've got a few quotes from different sectors. So this is across the UK, an example from Canada. So health sector, 2 health sector examples, education sector and federal government in Canada. So from the good, I was very stalwartly supported by my union rep at the time. The union came with me to meet HR, and they said, look, clearly this is a problem. I was being paid the whole time. You need pediatricians, blah, blah, blah. So the union supported this person, accompanied them to go to HR, supported and forwarded their case in front of HR. And then in the other two examples, I mean, the Joe, you could argue, is a bit ambivalent in terms of whether we see this as a good or a okay-ish support, because the union, he said, the union's helping me, doesn't understand the issues, though they're doing their best to help me. So I put this in the good category, but obviously it's a much more sort of ambivalent presentation, but I put it in the good because actually the union was there. The union supported this person, Joe, and made sure he didn't get fired. So depending on our basis or interpretation of what's good, I put this under the good category of support and experience of trade unions. And then finally, the person who was supported by Union Bob, and so how he persevered and used his expertise and experience to represent them in front of HR and support their case. So there are some of the good. And now I've grouped the bad and the ugly together. So it goes from sort of bad to ugly. But from the bad, you have here sort of James from the UK health sector. I thought the supports that I got from my union, which was union name, was pretty poor. So they didn't have the legal backing to take the case to tribunal. So he had to do it through a home contents insurer. So it was the end. And again, this one, is it good or bad? Because in the end, they did actually help him to negotiate on his behalf towards the end of the process. But I felt like this was, again, the two of them are a bit ambivalent, but the union has been there in terms of help, of supporting them in some ways, but the experience was quite negative for this person. Then the next two we have, so for example, Angela in the UK health sector. Well, I mistakenly made the assumption that by going and being part of the union, they would give me advice and support. The union themselves were appalling and discreetly advised me to keep quiet and to let it go, and advised me to go back to work against medical advice. They didn't make notes, they closed my case, a whole catalogue of stuff. So there you have a pretty poor example. I don't want my union involved anymore because I think they cause more harm than good. When I told my union rep this, they said, well, if you're taking legal advice, we'll have to withdraw from the case. I was hoping my union, having paid my dues for nearly 30 years, would support me in the tribunal case. I was left with no choice. I had to go with them. So they're a very sort of negative experience of trade unions. So a variety of different experiences that we kind of wanted to look at. Well, what do they tell us about the opportunities? And I'm finish off on this slide. But what do they tell us about the opportunities and challenges for trade unions when representing whistleblowers? What opportunities do they represent? So if we look at Gregor Murray's work, you can talk about the 2 minutes, perfect. They talk about this idea of strategic capacity. So trade unions evolving as the economic and political changes, so regulatory, in the face of sort of regulatory changes or in the context of regulatory changes, how they adapt and evolve to build strategic capacity from the resources that they already have. So institutional resources like legal levers. So they have this legal base that they can draw on. They have their lawyers, they have their experts within the organizations. So this is sort of legal levels for holding managers to account on unethical behavior. So if we're talking about building trade union power resources, what in terms of protecting whistleblowers or defending whistleblowers are the different power resources that they can build on. So institutional power support is from legal levers that they can use and the legal expertise that they have within the organisation. Providing individual service for members through workers brought into the union, so this can develop associational power if people see the relevance of the trade union. to them to provide individual service. And they could also do it not necessarily from a servicing perspective, but from an organising perspective. We're organising against against employer wrongdoing, and then collective societal framing around whistleblowing about constraining unethical behaviour. So this societal power in power resources, and from the perspective of the work of Virginia Dolgas and others, this idea of building more inclusive representation and solidarity by not just covering the bread and butter issues, salary, pay, and other working conditions, but actually representing those who are disclosing wrongdoing and going through whistleblowing processes. The challenges obviously brought up in the quotes that I gave you. So key tensions that can be involved. Well, the union might want workers to be quiet, or to tell them to just leave it, because both workers might be in the union, so there might be a conflict of interest there. Also, the ideological identity challenges. So this idea of supporting individuals and how they can build that into something that is more of a collective, has more of a collective basis to it. And then pragmatic, like the challenges of actually being able to mobilize resources or being able to support workers who are going through whistleblowing processes. Do they have the expertise within the union? So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.